There's over 500,000 plant species in the world, and we happily coexist with most of them. But some commonly grown garden plants are poisonous. While there have been few documented fatalities, each year many of us become ill through exposure to toxic plants. It really helps if you can identify poisonous plants growing in your garden. This is the potato creeper, and it's a classic member of the potato or Solanaceae family. To recognise plants in this family, look closely at the flower structure. They've all got 5 petals, which are fused at the base, and the male parts, the yellow anthers, are quite often gathered together in conical form. Now, this is another member. This is Solanum seaforthianum, and it's got a similar flower structure, but look at these delicious, tempting red fruit. They're poisonous. A lot of Solanaceae have poisonous fruit, and this one here, the orange fruit, is of the winter cherry. A lot of the common plants we grow in our gardens belong to this family. Two of the commonest members of the potato family that we grow are the potato and the tomato. All leafy parts of both plants are highly poisonous. In fact, green tomatoes can cause vomiting unless they're cooked. The heat neutralises the poisons. It's not the same with potato tubers. As soon as they go green, they're highly dangerous and are best planted in the garden. The Madagascan periwinkle is a fascinating plant. It's endangered in the wild, yet it's widely grown in our gardens because it's so drought tolerant and flowers prolifically. It's full of poisons. Many poisonous plants use their toxins as a defence against grazing animals. And if you look carefully at this plant, you'll notice that the flowers are propeller-shaped. And this is a hint. It's a member of the Acokanthera family. It's a relative of frangipani and star jasmine, all of which are toxic plants and all have poisonous sap. Now, this periwinkle has several poisons in it, and 2 of them, vincrestine and vinblastine, are really important in medicine. They're used as cures for tumours and for leukemia. Another plant family toxic to humans is the Euphorbiaceae. Common favourite plants grown in our gardens include the crown of thorns, snow in summer, the candelabra tree, and this plant here, the poinsettia. All plants in this family have toxic sap. It's milky and runny. Just have a look at the flowers. The flowers are inside here. These red parts on the outside are floral bracts, common in all members of the family. The true flowers are in here. They're much reduced and yellow and lack petals. When it comes to maintenance, all plants with dripping milky sap have to be treated with caution. And this poinsettia is a great example. Just one cut and it starts dripping this sap. This can burn rather like oven cleaner. And that's why I'm wearing a hat, gloves, long sleeve shirt, long trousers. Now, what do you do with a plant like this? This poinsettia has actually been pruned very well. All the cuts have been made below waist height, so the sap drips to the ground. Now, you've got to be very careful in hot weather. If you start to sweat, never use your gloves to wipe your brow. If you get sap in your eyes, you're off to hospital. The good news is that all the green waste from poisonous plants can be composted. The toxins are fully biodegradable, but don't burn them. I'm standing next to Bushman's poison. It's an old-fashioned, sweetly perfumed plant from South Africa. Originally, sap was used on the tips of arrows and spears. It's lethal. Now, if you burn this, the fumes will intoxicate before they kill. How do you recognise it? Well, if you look at the leaves, it's remarkably similar to the bay leaf. But then they produce fruit, which are very much like olives. The simple test is to cut the plant, and you'll see the white, milky sap which separates it from both olives and bay trees. Anything that's toxic to humans is likely to be toxic to pets. And when it comes to children, it's very important to remember they're not just small adults. Toddlers don't have fully developed immune systems. Always assume that kids and pets will explore and experiment with garden plants. And if you need further information, contact your Poisons Information Centre in your state.
A really common inquiry we get at Gardening Australia is, how do I know if a plant is poisonous, particularly when it comes to pets? Well, the truth is there's no simple answer, but there's plenty of information out there. You've got to do some research. There are a couple of things to know. The first thing is that different species of plants are poisonous for different species of animals. So, for example, something like a macadamia nut, which is perfectly edible for me, is poisonous for my dog. Other things you need to consider are the behaviour of those animals that are going to interact with your garden. So, for example, something like a Spathiphyllum, which is a really common house plant, that is poisonous to both cats and dogs. If you had a kitten or a puppy who's going to chew anything in the house, you'd have it up out of their way or out of the house altogether. But my guys, they don't really bother with it. So if you do a bit of research, you can safely have your plants and your pets too.
Many of us have had pets that have fallen ill as a result of eating something in the garden that they shouldn't. There are many Australian plants and foods that are quite toxic to animals but are perfectly safe for humans to eat. Today I'm visiting Dr. Ross Mackenzie, a veterinary pathologist with a special interest in poisonous plants. In fact, his garden here in the Brisbane suburb of Ashgrove is full of them. I can see we've got a lot of toxic plants around us. I take these quite casually in my stride, but it's a little bit more complicated than what's just poisonous to gardeners, isn't it?
Oh yes, yes. It's very important to realise that it's the animal species that's important. Various animal species are more susceptible to a particular plant than other animal species. Now, one of the examples is this black bean tree here. I've got the seeds in my hand here, and these are the toxic part of the plant. And if I was to eat half one of those, chances are I'd be hospitalised with diarrhoea and vomiting. But a cow could come along and eat a whole bucket full of these things and not turn a hair. So we're very susceptible, cattle aren't. I really like them.
Now, this is a teaching garden.
Yes.
I understand you've used this for many years for students.
Yes, I taught at the University of Queensland, the veterinary students there for 14 years, and I would bring them here and show them the actual plants growing in the garden.
Ross recently published his life's work. It's an amazing reference guide called Australia's Poisonous Plants, Fungi and Cyanobacteria. I'm surprised to see comfrey in this book.
Well, comfrey is a very commonly grown plant in garden. Comfrey is in a group of plants, the borage family, of which there are a number of major weeds in southern Australia, and they are serious issues for livestock such as cattle and sheep.
As a vet, what were some of the most commonly encountered animals that were poisoned?
Well, I was working with livestock mostly, but of course that's not to say that dogs and cats and cage birds don't get poisoned. They often do. What I've got on the table here is a range of things that we would commonly eat as humans, but that are a bit of a risk to some animals. We're sitting under a macadamia tree here, and I've got a plate of macadamia nuts here. Now, dogs have recently been discovered to be susceptible to macadamia nuts. So a handful would be enough to poison a medium-sized dog, say about a Kelpie-sized dog.
How about some of these other things?
Well, let's take the avocados. Cage birds, if they're fed the flesh, can literally drop off the perch dead because the toxin in the avocados affects the heart function. Onions have a toxin in them, which is a sulfur compound, which will attack the red blood cells of dogs, and potentially they could die. Lilies are an issue for cats. One petal or one leaf, if it's chewed by a cat, can damage kidneys. Also, daylilies have the same toxin in them. You can't always save the animal if you don't get them early enough.
Now, this plant is Nardoo and it looks a bit weedy, but what's toxic about it?
It contains a chemical which destroys vitamin B1. If sheep or horses eat a lot of it, they develop brain damage, basically.
But our Aborigines used to eat this.
They
didn't
did indeed, and they knew how to process it. They would collect the little spore capsules that occur down at the base of the plant and grind them up, wash them with running water, and then bake them into a kind of bread. Burke and Wills, towards the end of their journey in Central Australia, were trying to do the same thing, except they didn't have the clue that they had to process the stuff. So they were eating it raw, and quite possibly the toxin had a bit of an effect on them towards the end of their life.
What do you think home gardeners should do with this information?
Well, the very first thing they shouldn't do, Jerry, is panic. I tend to send people paranoid talking about all these things, but what they really need to do is educate themselves about the properties of the plants they have in their garden, be able to recognise those plants and prevent poisoning by keeping susceptible animals away from the plants when there's a risk.